The 66 books of the Bible display a great deal of variety. They're not all the same genre. So, for example, we have books that are historical in nature, like Genesis, Exodus, the Gospels. But there are also books that are filled with what we might call law. They give guidance for the way worship should be performed and for the way people should behave. We have those kinds of writings in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. We also have books that give instructions for the young believers. I'm thinking, of course, especially of the New Testament epistles, which were written to the first churches. But we also have books that deal with the future. We call them prophecy, such as the book of Daniel or the book of Revelation, telling us about what's going to happen in the future. In the 19th century, there was an overwhelming negative opinion about the reliability of the Bible. Scholars, especially in Germany, but later also just as much in England and then even in the USA, had the opinion that the Bible was quite inaccurate in the things that it asserted and quite unreliable in the things that it taught. However, many archaeologists in the 19th and 20th centuries were busy doing extensive research in Greece, Turkey, the Holy Land, and made many discoveries of an archaeological nature, as well as discovering many portions, fragments, manuscripts of the Scripture dating back to early centuries. One of the most active archaeologists of this era, the early 20th century, and in fact one of the most respected of modern archaeologists, was a man named Nelson Glueck. Nelson Glueck made some very remarkable statements about what his archaeology showed him as to the accuracy of the Bible. Let me read to you what he said. It may be stated categorically that no archaeological discovery has ever controverted a biblical reference. Scores of archaeological findings have been made which confirm in clear outline or exact detail historical statements in the Bible. And by the same token, proper evaluation of biblical descriptions has often led to amazing discoveries. This is a remarkable statement. What it clearly means is the overwhelming skepticism of scholars in the 19th and 20th centuries is actually unfounded, that the references in the Bible to historical events are actually accurate references to events that took place in history. Of course, the Bible is not just a historical narrative. It's also a prophetical book. It contains not just references to historical events, but to the interpretation of those events, what those events meant, and to prophecies having to do with future events. It also warns us of future events, of times when God will intervene in the flow of history. So the truthfulness of the Bible should not be seen just in terms of historical accuracy, but also in terms of its broader message, its claims to truth about God, Jesus Christ, the spiritual and moral nature of man, and what God requires of man. The historical reliability of the Bible, then, is more than just an attitude towards the historical record. It encourages us to take seriously its claims of truthfulness about ultimate issues, about the relationship of man to God and man's need for forgiveness from his sins. I think knowing the historical reliability of the Bible should actually motivate us to investigate its claims, to investigate the claims of Jesus Christ, who invites all people to come to him and become his followers. As to whether the Bible has been changed, by that I mean changed from what was originally written down by the authors of the Bible, we can be fairly confident that this was not the case. Of course, the entire Bible was written long before the invention of the printing press. This means that all the copies of the Bible like all the books of antiquity, had to be hand copied. The work of a scribe, a person who engaged in the painstaking work of copying books onto papyrus or parchment, was actually an important activity throughout much of antiquity. Careful labor was required, and normally exacting tests were practiced to ensure that documents were copied correctly. Certainly, minor textual errors crept into texts, but these were relatively easy to detect and did not change the meaning or the substance of the works being copied. The Bible is actually a unique case in terms of the writings from antiquity. Whereas we have only a handful of manuscripts of ancient writings from authors like Homer or the classical authors of the Greek and Roman periods, we have thousands, literally tens of thousands of copies of fragments and portions of manuscripts of the biblical book. The wealth of manuscript copies from antiquity enables textual scholars to examine and compare the existing copies and to establish with a very high degree of certainty what the original text said. Thus, when you pick up a modern printed copy of the Bible, you hold in your hand a unique volume. It is a book that was written over a period of about 1,500 years by about 40 different authors in 3 different languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. There are about 25,000 manuscripts, fragments, and parchments that we now have of the Bible. These display an amazing consistency which allows us to know with a great deal of confidence what the original text actually said. There's quite simply a mountain of evidence that what we have today in our Bibles is actually almost 99% or more certain exactly that which was written by the original authors. So as to a change in the Bible from the time it was written to the copies we have now, there's absolutely no evidence for it. On the contrary, there's a great deal of evidence that we have very accurate copies.